A queen married a man some called a savage, and it forged Europe's largest kingdom for a time. Another royal wedding saw a teenage bride gift her new husband more land than his own king possessed, only for her to later wage war against him alongside their sons. Then there were the second cousins who married in secret, defying a king, uniting their fractured lands and bankrolling a journey that literally redrew the world map. And hold on to your helmets for this one. A king was brutally overthrown, possibly murdered in a truly horrific way, after his own wife, the French king's sister, no less, teamed up with her lover to take his crown. These weren't just any weddings. These were medieval power plays sealed with a vow, and they utterly redirected the river of history. Number 7. William the Conqueror and Matilda of Flanders. When a controversial "I do" cemented a conquest. Picture this. It's the mid-11th century. Normandy, a powerful duchy in what is now northern France, is ruled by a man named William. Now, William was ambitious, tough, and a brilliant military leader, but he had a bit of an image problem. He was William the Bastard, the illegitimate son of the previous Duke, Robert I, and a woman named Herleva, who was likely the daughter of a tanner. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and legitimacy, this was a serious handicap. Across the English Channel, England was ruled by Edward the Confessor, a king without children. William believed, and would later fiercely claim, that Edward had promised him the English throne. But to make such a massive claim stake, he needed power, allies, and a touch more respectability. Enter Matilda of Flanders. She was no ordinary noblewoman. Her father was Baldwin V, the Count of Flanders, a very wealthy and influential territory bordering Normandy. Even more impressively, Matilda was a descendant of Alfred the Great, the legendary Anglo-Saxon King of Wessex. This meant she had royal English blood flowing through her veins, something William sorely lacked. Marrying Matilda would be a massive political win for William. It would give him a powerful ally in Flanders, boost his own status, and crucially provide his future children with a legitimate connection to the English royal line, strengthening any claim they might have to the throne. But there was a pretty big snag. William and Matilda were related, cousins to be precise, within the degrees of kinship forbidden by the Church for marriage without special permission. The Pope, Leo IX, citing this consanguinity, actually banned the marriage. This was a major roadblock. Defying the Pope was a risky business. Yet, William was not a man easily deterred. According to one rather dramatic but possibly embellished story, William was so determined to marry Matilda, who was initially said to have refused him due to his illegitimacy, that he rode to Bruges, found her on her way to church, dragged her off her horse by her braids, threw her to the ground, and then rode off. Whether this violent courtship actually happened is debated by historians. But what is certain is that negotiations, and perhaps William's sheer persistence, continued. Despite the papal ban, William and Matilda went ahead and married around 1050 or 1051 in the town of Eu, in Normandy. For several years they lived as a married couple, while technically excommunicated, or at least under papal disapproval. It wasn't until 1059 that a deal was struck with Pope Nicholas II. As penance for marrying against the Church's initial orders, William and Matilda each agreed to found an abbey in Caen, Normandy. William founded the Abbaye aux Hommes, Men's Abbey, and Matilda the Abbaye aux Dames, Women's Abbey. These magnificent structures still stand today. With the papal blessing secured, their union was finally fully legitimate in the eyes of the Church and the world. The marriage proved to be incredibly successful, both personally and politically. Matilda was a capable and intelligent partner. When William launched his audacious invasion of England in 1066, culminating in the Battle of Hastings and his crowning as King of England, Matilda played a vital role. She governed Normandy as regent in his absence, ensuring stability in their home duchy, while William was busy conquering his new kingdom. She even funded a ship, the Mora, for the invasion fleet. Her English royal lineage was also a propaganda asset, helping to soften the image of the Norman conquest as a purely foreign takeover. Together, William and Matilda had at least 9 children who survived to adulthood, including 2 future kings of England, William II, William Rufus, and Henry I. Their daughters made strategic marriages into other powerful European houses, further extending Norman influence. The stability and legitimacy provided by this marriage were foundational to the Norman dynasty's grip on England. Without Matilda's connections and her capable regency, William's conquest and the subsequent decades of consolidating power would have been significantly more challenging. The union effectively secured the future of Norman England, changing the language, culture, and political landscape of the British Isles forever. It also inextricably linked the destinies of England and Normandy for generations to come, setting the stage for future conflicts and alliances across the Channel. This marriage wasn't just a personal bond. It was a cornerstone of a new European order. Number 6. Isabella of France and Edward II of England. When a she-wolf devoured her king. Imagine being a princess, daughter of one of Europe's most powerful kings, Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. You're beautiful, intelligent, and from a young age you're a pawn in the great game of international politics. This was Isabella's reality. In 1308, at the tender age of about 12 or 13, she was married to the newly crowned King Edward II of England. This was meant to be a classic medieval peace-weaving marriage, designed to smooth over long-standing tensions between England and France, 2 kingdoms that were often at each other's throats over territories like Gascony in southwestern France, which was held by the English kings, but as a vassal of the French crown. A royal wedding, full of pomp and promise, was supposed to usher in an era of good stir. It did anything but. Edward II was complicated. He was tall and handsome, but he wasn't his father, the formidable Edward I, Hammer of the Scots. Edward II quickly showed a distinct lack of interest in traditional kingly pursuits like warfare and effective governance. Instead, he showered favor and affection on a succession of male companions, most notoriously Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight. Almost immediately after the wedding, Edward II humiliated Isabella by giving Gaveston the very jewels that were part of her dowry and seating Gaveston in a place of higher honor than her own uncles at their coronation feast. This was not a good start. Can you imagine the insult? The French royal family was not amused, and Isabella, young as she was, must have felt it keenly. For years, Isabella endured. She bore Edward 4 children, including the future Edward III, thus fulfilling her primary dynastic duty. She even tried to act as a peacemaker between her husband and his increasingly rebellious barons who detested Gaveston, and later the Despencer family, Hugh Despencer the Elder and his son Hugh the Younger, who became Edward's new favorites after Gaveston was executed by angry nobles in 1312. The Despensers were seen as greedy, corrupt, and effectively ruling England in their own interest, further alienating the king from his wife and his kingdom. The breaking point came in the 1320s. Tensions with France flared up again over Gascony. In 1325, Isabella was sent to France, supposedly to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV. This was Edward II's colossal mistake. Once in her homeland, Isabella found herself free from Edward's and the Despensers' control. And she wasn't alone. She soon linked up with Roger Mortimer, an English nobleman who had escaped from the Tower of London after leading a failed rebellion against Edward II. Isabella and Mortimer became lovers, and together they began to plot. Isabella refused to return to England as long as the Despensers held power. She publicly denounced them, and by extension, her husband's rule. She gathered a small army of mercenaries, financed partly by her brother and by Hainaut, in modern-day Belgium, Netherlands, through the betrothal of her son, young Prince Edward, to Philippa of Hainaut. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer landed in England. They were met with widespread support. The English people, tired of Edward II's misrule, the Despensers' greed, and the disastrous wars with Scotland, like the Battle of Bannockburn, flocked to her banner. She became known as the She-Wolf of France, a formidable and determined figure. Edward II's regime crumbled with astonishing speed. The Despensers were captured and brutally executed. Hugh Despenser the Younger, in particular, suffered a horrific traitor's death, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Edward II himself was captured in November 1326. By January 1327, Parliament forced him to abdicate in favor of his son, who became King Edward III. Isabella and Mortimer effectively ruled England as regents for the young king. What happened to Edward II next is shrouded in grim mystery and gruesome legend. He was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. The official story was that he died there in September 1327. However, persistent rumors, most famously a later highly sensationalized account, claimed he was murdered in a particularly horrific manner by having a red-hot poker inserted into his anus, a method supposedly chosen to leave no marks on the body. While the exact cause of his death is still debated by historians, it's clear his end was miserable and likely violent. Isabella and Mortimer's rule didn't last forever. In 1330, the young Edward III, now 18, asserted his own authority. He staged a coup, had Mortimer arrested and executed as a traitor, and placed his mother Isabella under comfortable but firm house arrest. She lived for another 28 years, eventually reconciling somewhat with her son. The marriage of Isabella and Edward II, intended to secure peace, instead led directly to the deposition and probable murder of an English king by his own wife and her lover. It destabilized England for a time and dramatically altered the course of its monarchy. It also, ironically, through their son Edward III, laid further groundwork for the 100 Years' War. Edward III would use his maternal lineage, his claim to the French throne through Isabella, daughter of Philip IV, as a pretext to challenge the French crown, plunging England and France into a conflict that would last over a century. What a way for a peace-brokering marriage to backfire. Number 5. Otto I and Adelaide of Italy. The wedding that basically rebooted the Roman Empire, kind of. Okay, let's rewind to the 10th century. Europe was a bit of a mess. The great empire of Charlemagne had fractured. Vikings were raiding, Magyars were thundering in from the east, and local lords were pretty much doing their own thing. In the German-speaking lands, a strong ruler named Otto I, King of East Francia or Germany, was making a name for himself. He was ambitious, a skilled warrior, and had a vision of a more unified, stable Christian realm. He had already crushed rebellious dukes and famously defeated the Magyar invaders at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, earning him the title Otto the Great. Meanwhile, south of the Alps, Italy was even more chaotic. Various nobles and kings were squabbling for power, a period sometimes called the pornocracy, or rule of harlots, due to the influence of certain powerful Roman aristocratic women on the papacy. Into this turmoil stepped a remarkable woman, Adelaide of Italy. Adelaide was the young widow of King Lothair, the Second of Italy. After Lothair's death, possibly by poison, in 950, his rival, Berengar II of Ivrea, seized the Italian throne and tried to force Adelaide to marry his own son, Adalbert, to legitimize his rule. Adelaide, who was renowned for her beauty, intelligence, and piety, refused point blank. She wasn't about to be a pawn in Berengar's game. Her defiance came at a price. Berengar imprisoned her in a castle, treating her harshly. But Adelaide was resourceful. Legend has it, she escaped her confinement in a rather dramatic fashion, possibly with the help of a loyal priest, and hid in the marshes near Lake Garda before finding refuge in the castle of Canossa. From there, she sent out a desperate plea for help. And who answered the call? None other than Otto I of Germany. Otto saw a golden opportunity. Italy was rich, prestigious, and home to Rome, the seat of the papacy and the symbolic heart of the old Roman Empire. Intervening on Adelaide's behalf would give him a legitimate reason to march into Italy, assert his authority, and potentially claim the imperial title that had been vacant or weakly held for decades. So, in 951, Otto crossed the Alps with his army, defeated Berengar, and triumphantly entered Pavia, the old Lombard capital. And there in Pavia, in October 951, Otto I, a widower himself, married Adelaide of Italy. He was about 39. She was around 20. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a masterstroke. By marrying Adelaide, the legitimate Queen of Italy, Otto instantly gained a strong claim to the Italian throne. He declared himself King of the Lombards, another title for King of Italy. This union of the German and Italian crowns under one ruler was a massive step. Adelaide, for her part, gained a powerful protector and a husband who clearly respected her abilities. She wasn't just a trophy wife. She became an active partner in Otto's rule, known for her charity, her influence on ecclesiastical appointments, and her political astuteness. The most significant long-term consequence of this marriage, however, came a decade later. Otto had to return to Germany to deal with rebellions, including one led by his own son from his first marriage. But his connection to Italy, solidified by his marriage to Adelaide and his continued involvement in Italian affairs, remained. In 961, Pope John XII, threatened by Berengar II, who had resurfaced, appealed to Otto for help. Otto marched back into Italy, sorted things out, and on February 2, 962, in Rome, Pope John XII crowned Otto I as Holy Roman Emperor. This coronation is seen by many historians as the true foundation of the Holy Roman Empire, a vast, complex political entity that would shape Central Europe for over 800 years, until its dissolution in 1806 during the Napoleonic Wars. The marriage to Adelaide was a critical catalyst. It gave Otto the initial legitimate foothold in Italy and the claim to be its protector, which in turn led directly to his imperial coronation. Adelaide herself was crowned empress alongside him, and she continued to be a hugely influential figure throughout his reign and even during the early years of their son Otto II and grandson Otto III, often acting as regent. So, a queen's desperate plea and a king's ambitious response, sealed by a wedding, didn't just unite two people or even two kingdoms. It laid the groundwork for a new Roman Empire in the West, fundamentally altering the political and religious map of Europe. Otto and Adelaide's partnership demonstrated how a strategic marriage could be far more than a personal alliance. It could be an empire-building tool, reshaping the destiny of a continent. Without Adelaide's plight and her subsequent marriage to Otto, the dream of a revived Western Roman Empire might have remained just that, a dream. Number 4. Henry VII of England and Elizabeth of York. The wedding that literally bled red and white roses into one. Let's journey to late 15th century England. For 3 decades, the country had been torn apart by a brutal series of civil wars known as the Wars of the Roses. It was a dynastic struggle for the English throne between two rival branches of the Plantagenet royal family, the House of Lancaster, whose symbol was the red rose, and the House of York, represented by the white rose. Imagine decades of battles, betrayals, kings being deposed and murdered, nobles switching sides. It was a period of intense instability and bloodshed. By 1485, things came to a head. Richard III, a Yorkist king whose reign was controversial, think the Princes in the Tower, faced a challenge from a relatively unknown Lancastrian claimant, Henry Tudor. Henry had a fairly tenuous claim to the throne through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of John of Gaunt, a son of Edward III. He had spent much of his life in exile in Brittany. But he was the main Lancastrian hope. At the Battle of Bosworth Field in August 1485, Richard III was defeated and killed. Henry Tudor, against many odds, picked up the crown from the battlefield, or so the story goes, and was proclaimed King Henry VII. But winning a battle didn't mean the wars were over. England was deeply divided. Henry VII was a Lancastrian victor in a land full of Yorkist sympathizers. He needed to heal the wounds, to bring peace and stability. And the most potent symbol of reconciliation, the one move that could potentially unite the warring factions, was a marriage. He needed to marry Elizabeth of York. Elizabeth of York was the eldest daughter of the Yorkist, King Edward IV, and sister to the Princes in the Tower, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, whose fate under Richard III remained a dark mystery. As the senior surviving Yorkist heir, she held a powerful claim to the throne in her own right. Many Yorkists believed she should be queen. Marrying her was a political masterstroke for Henry VII. It would symbolically merge the red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York, creating the new Tudor rose, a powerful emblem of unity. It would also neutralize her claim as a rival and ensure that their children would have an undisputed lineage, combining both Lancastrian and Yorkist blood. The marriage had been floated as a possibility, even before Bosworth. In fact, Henry had publicly sworn an oath in Rennes Cathedral in 1483 to marry Elizabeth if he became king, a move designed to win Yorkist support for his invasion. After his victory, Henry took his time, wanting to be seen as king in his own right, not just through his wife. He was crowned in October 1485, and Parliament officially recognized his kingship. Only then, with his own position secured, did he proceed with the wedding. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York were married on January 18, 1486, in Westminster Abbey. The public reaction was reportedly one of great joy and relief. People were desperate for peace. Chroniclers of the time wrote about celebrations, pageants, and a widespread hope that this union would finally end the decades of strife. And, remarkably, it largely did. While Henry VII faced some Yorkist rebellions and pretenders during his reign, like Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, the marriage to Elizabeth significantly blunted their appeal. It was hard to rally support against a king whose wife was the beloved Yorkist princess and whose children were the living embodiment of unity. Elizabeth seems to have been a gentle, pious, and popular queen. By all accounts, the marriage, though entirely politically motivated, developed into one of mutual affection and respect. They had 7 children, though only 4 survived into adulthood: Arthur, Prince of Wales; Margaret, who would marry into the Scottish royal family, a union with its own huge historical consequences; Henry, the future King Henry VIII; and Mary, who would marry the King of France. Elizabeth's death in 1503 following childbirth reportedly devastated Henry VII. The most profound impact of this marriage was the establishment of the Tudor dynasty, which would rule England for 118 years and oversee some of the most touring periods in English history, including the English Reformation and the Elizabethan Golden Age. It brought an end to the Wars of the Roses, ushering in a period of relative peace and stability that allowed England to recover and prosper. The symbolic power of the Tudor rose, representing the union of Lancaster and York, became deeply ingrained in the national consciousness. This single marriage didn't just stop a war. It laid the foundation for a new England, paving the way for its emergence as a major European power in the centuries that followed. It was a political marriage that truly worked, changing England's destiny from one of internal conflict to one of dynastic strength and eventually global influence. Number 3. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. The power couple and power struggle that forged an empire. Imagine being one of the most eligible heiresses in 12th century Europe. That was Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine. Aquitaine wasn't just some minor duchy. It was huge, covering much of southwestern France, a wealthy, cultured land famous for its wine and its troubadour poets. When her father died, Eleanor inherited it all in her own right. At just 15 in 1137, she was married to Louis, the heir to the French throne, who became King Louis VII of France just a few weeks later. So Eleanor was Queen of France. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, not quite. Eleanor was vibrant, intelligent, and strong-willed. Louis VII was pious, reserved, and perhaps a bit dull for her taste. Their personalities clashed. A major point of contention was their failure to produce a male heir. They had 2 daughters. Eleanor even accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade, a highly unusual move for a queen at the time. Rumors swirled about her conduct on crusade, including alleged affairs, though these are hard to substantiate. What is clear is that the marriage was not a happy one. After 15 years, citing consanguinity, they were distant cousins, the marriage was annulled in March 1152. Eleanor got her vast lands of Aquitaine back. She was single again, and arguably even more powerful. Now, here's where history takes a sharp turn. Just 8 weeks later, yes, only 8 weeks, Eleanor, now around 30 years old, married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was 11 years younger than her, energetic, ambitious, and about to become even more powerful. This was a shocking and incredibly bold move. By marrying Henry, Eleanor wasn't just choosing a new husband. She was dramatically shifting the balance of power in Western Europe. Henry already controlled Normandy and Anjou. Adding Aquitaine through Eleanor meant their combined territories in France were now significantly larger than those controlled directly by Eleanor's ex-husband, the King of France. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry Plantagenet ascended to the English throne as King Henry II of England. This meant that Henry and Eleanor now presided over a vast collection of lands that stretched from the borders of Scotland down through England, across Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and all the way to the Pyrenees with Aquitaine. This sprawling territory became known as the Angevin Empire, named after Anjou, Henry's paternal inheritance. It was a colossal personal union of lands, all under one dynamic and often ruthless ruler. The early years of their marriage seemed productive. They had 8 children together, including 5 sons, which was a huge dynastic success. Among them were Richard the Lionheart and John Lackland, both future kings of England. Eleanor was actively involved in governing their vast domains, particularly Aquitaine, where she was the ruling duchess. She was a patron of arts and culture, fostering the courtly love tradition. However, the relationship between Eleanor and Henry eventually deteriorated dramatically. Henry was known for his fiery temper and his infidelities, most famously with Rosamund Clifford, the Fair Rosamund. Eleanor was not one to be sidelined. As their sons grew older, they became resentful of their father's tight grip on power and his reluctance to delegate any real authority to them. In 1173, driven by their own ambitions and possibly encouraged by their mother, 3 of Henry's sons, Henry the Young King, Richard the future Lionheart, and Geoffrey of Brittany, launched a major revolt against him. This was the Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174. And guess who supported her sons? Eleanor. When the revolt failed, Henry II was furious. He had his rebellious sons eventually reconciled, temporarily, but he imprisoned Eleanor. She spent the next 16 years confined, mostly in Salisbury Castle and other strongholds in England, a queen effectively under house arrest by her own husband. It was only after Henry II's death in 1189 that their son, Richard I, the Lionheart, released her. And what a release it was! Eleanor, now in her late 60s, burst back onto the political scene with incredible energy. While Richard I was off on the Third Crusade and later imprisoned in Germany, Eleanor governed England as regent, demonstrating her formidable political skills. She raised the enormous ransom demanded for Richard's release. She secured the succession for her youngest son, John, after Richard's death. She continued to travel extensively, arranging marriages for her grandchildren and protecting her beloved Aquitaine. She lived into her 80s, an astonishing age for the time, dying in 1204 at the Abbey of Fontevraud, where she, Henry II, and Richard I are buried. The marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II directly created the Angevin Empire, a massive political entity that dominated Western Europe for decades. This, in turn, led to generations of conflict between England and France, as French kings sought to reclaim these vast French territories held by the English crown. It set the stage for the 100 Years' War centuries later. Their children, particularly Richard and John, had reigns that profoundly shaped English history, including the Magna Carta under King John. Eleanor herself, as a powerful duchess, a queen of two countries, a mother of kings, and a political force in her own right for over 6 decades, remains one of the most extraordinary women of the Middle Ages. Her marriage to Henry II was a pivotal moment, unleashing forces that would redefine kingdoms and dynasties. Number 2. Isabella, the First of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon. The secret wedding that forged a nation and funded a new world. The Iberian Peninsula in the mid-15th century was a patchwork of kingdoms. The Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, Portugal, and Navarre coexisted often uneasily, with the last remaining Muslim emirate of Granada in the south. For centuries, the Christian kingdoms had been engaged in the Reconquista, the gradual reconquest of territory from the Moors. Castile was the largest and most powerful of these Christian kingdoms, but it was often plagued by internal strife among its powerful nobles. Aragon, a maritime power with territories across the Mediterranean, had its own distinct interests. Isabella I of Castile was a woman of intense piety, strong will, and formidable determination. Her path to the throne of Castile was not straightforward. She was the half-sister of King Henry IV of Castile, whose own daughter Juana was rumored to be illegitimate, earning her the nickname La Beltrine. This succession dispute created massive instability. Ferdinand II of Aragon was the heir to the throne of Aragon, known for his political shrewdness and military skill. A marriage between Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon was seen by many as a dream alliance, a way to potentially unite the two largest Spanish kingdoms, consolidate Christian power, and finally complete the Reconquista. But there were obstacles, big ones. King Henry IV of Castile wanted Isabella to marry other suitors, including the King of Portugal or a French duke to suit his own political alliances. Isabella had other ideas. She was determined to choose her own husband, and she favored Ferdinand. They were also second cousins, meaning they needed a papal dispensation to marry. According to some accounts, when a papal bull of dispensation finally arrived, later alleged to have been falsified by Ferdinand's supporters to speed things up, the couple decided to act quickly and secretly. In October 1469, Ferdinand, disguised as a merchant servant to blend in, traveled covertly through Castile to meet Isabella in Valladolid. Isabella herself had to slip away from her brother's court. Their wedding was a relatively modest affair for such high-ranking royals. Given the clandestine circumstances and the political opposition, Isabella was 18. Ferdinand was 17. It was a gamble, a defiant act against the prevailing political winds, driven by their shared vision for their kingdoms. The immediate aftermath was turbulent. King Henry IV was furious and for a time disinherited Isabella again in favor of Juana la Beltraneja. When Henry IV died in 1474, Isabella immediately proclaimed herself Queen of Castile. This triggered the War of the Castilian Succession, as Portugal, backing Juana's claim, invaded. Ferdinand proved to be an invaluable military ally to Isabella, and together they fought to secure her throne. By 1479, Isabella's claim was solidified, and in that same year Ferdinand's father died, making him King of Aragon. Though Castile and Aragon remained technically separate kingdoms with their own laws and institutions, they were now united through their marriage, ruled jointly by Isabella and Ferdinand, who became known as the Catholic monarchs. Their motto was, Tanto Monta, Monta Tanto, Isabel como, Fernando. They amount to the same Isabella as Ferdinand, signifying their equal partnership in rule, though in practice Isabella held more sway in Castilian affairs and Ferdinand in Aragonese ones. What did this marriage change? Just about everything for Spain. First, the unification, though personal at first, it laid the groundwork for a unified Spanish state, gave them the strength to complete the Reconquista. In 1492, after a long siege, the Emirate of Granada fell to Castilian forces. This was a monumental event, ending almost 800 years of Muslim rule in Iberia and cementing the Catholic monarch's image as defenders of Christendom. Second, 1492, was a year of massive historical importance for another reason, directly linked to Isabella. In that same year, after initially rejecting his proposals, Queen Isabella I agreed to finance the voyage of an Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus, who proposed to reach the East Indies by sailing west across the Atlantic. Ferdinand was reportedly more skeptical, but Isabella, perhaps driven by a crusading zeal to spread Christianity and find new wealth after the expensive Granada campaign, took the gamble. Columbus's discovery of the Americas for Europe in October 1492 would utterly transform the world, leading to vast Spanish colonization, immense wealth flowing into Spain and Europe. The exchange of goods, diseases, and cultures, the Columbian Exchange, and centuries of European global dominance. Third, the Catholic monarchs embarked on a policy of religious uniformity. Also in 1492, they issued the Alhambra Decree, ordering the expulsion of all practicing Jews from Spain. Muslims were later also forced to convert or leave. The Spanish Inquisition, established earlier, with papal approval, to ensure the orthodoxy of recent converts, conversos, became a powerful and feared institution under their rule, enforcing religious conformity. These policies had profound and often tragic long-term social, economic, and cultural consequences for Spain. Their children's marriages were also strategically vital. Their daughter, Joanna, often called the Mad, married Philip the Handsome of the Habsburg dynasty, and their son, Charles V, would inherit a colossal empire including Spain, its American colonies, the Netherlands, Austria, and the Holy Roman Emperorship. Another daughter, Catherine of Aragon, famously married Arthur, Prince of Wales, and then his younger brother, King Henry VIII of England, a union that would later trigger the English Reformation. The marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand was thus one of the most consequential in history. It led to the political and religious unification of Spain, the end of the Reconquista, the launch of European exploration and colonization of the Americas, and the establishment of Spain as a major global power for centuries. All from a secret wedding between two determined teenagers who dared to defy a king. Number 1. Jadwiga of Poland and Vladislav I Jagiello of Lithuania. The teen queen, the pagan duke, and the birth of a superpower. Picture this. It's the late 14th century. The Kingdom of Poland is in a precarious position. To its west and north lies the powerful and often aggressive Teutonic Order, a German military monastic state. To its east is the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a vast, sprawling territory, the last major pagan state in Europe, whose lands stretched from the Baltic Sea almost to the Black Sea. Lithuania was a formidable military power, but its paganism made it a target for crusades, especially by the Teutonic Knights, who used it as a pretext for constant warfare and expansion. Poland itself was facing a succession crisis. Enter Jadwiga, also known as Hedwig. In 1384, at the astonishingly young age of 10, yes, 10, she was crowned not queen, but King of Poland. The title King, Rex Poloniae, was deliberately used to emphasize that she was a monarch in her own right, not just a queen consort. Jadwiga was the youngest daughter of Louis the Great, King of Hungary and Poland. When Louis died without male heirs, the Polish nobles, wanting to avoid continued personal union with Hungary and eager to secure their own interests, chose Jadwiga. She was intelligent, devoutly Catholic, well-educated. She reportedly spoke several languages, and already, even as a child, known for her piety and compassion. Now, Jadwiga was actually betrothed from a very young age to William Habsburg, Duke of Austria. This was a prestigious match, and by some accounts, Jadwiga genuinely cared for William. They had even participated in a provisional marriage ceremony, sponsalia de curaturip, which was considered binding. However, the Polish nobles had other plans. They saw a far greater strategic advantage in an alliance with Lithuania. Such an alliance could create a massive, powerful bloc capable of countering the Teutonic Knights and securing Poland's eastern frontiers. The Lithuanian Grand Duke was Jogaila, later known by his Polish regnal name, Vladislav I Jagiello. To many Poles, especially the clergy, Jogaila was a pagan, a barbarian, a savage. Lithuania practiced its own complex polytheistic religion. The prospect of their young devout Catholic King Jadwiga marrying this older, he was in his 30s or early 40s, pagan duke was, for some horrifying. There were rumors and propaganda portraying him as uncivilized. But the political logic was compelling. Jogaila, for his part, saw huge benefits. Marrying Jadwiga would mean an alliance with Poland, which would greatly strengthen his position against the Teutonic Knights and other rivals like Moscow. Crucially, he offered to convert himself and all of Lithuania to Roman Catholicism as part of the deal. This was a monumental offer, the Christianization of the last pagan nation in Europe. The pressure on young Jadwiga must have been immense. She was torn between her personal feelings for William Habsburg, who even came to Krakow hoping to consummate their marriage, and the immense political and religious duty being urged upon her by her advisors and the Polish nobility. Chroniclers describe her weeping and praying for guidance. According to one famous story, she even took an axe to try and break down the gates of Wall Castle in Krakow to escape and join William, only to be persuaded otherwise by a wise advisor. Ultimately, she made the sacrifice. She agreed to break her engagement with William, which required papal annulment, and marry Jadwiga for the good of her kingdom and the Christian faith. In 1386, Jadwiga arrived in Krakow. He was baptized, taking the Christian name Ladislaw. Shortly thereafter, on February 18, 1386, Ladislaw Jagiello married Jadwiga, who was then about 12 years old. A few weeks later, on March 4th, he was crowned King of Poland, ruling jointly with Jadwiga, though Jadwiga, as the hereditary monarch, often held significant influence. The impact of this marriage was immediate and good. First, it created the Polish-Lithuanian Union. While the two states remained distinct entities for a long time, they were now linked by a single monarch, and their foreign policies became increasingly aligned. This union created one of the largest and most powerful political entities in Europe, stretching from the Baltic to near the Black Sea. Second, it led to the official Christianization of Lithuania. This was a massive religious and cultural shift, bringing Lithuania into the fold of Western Christendom and removing the main pretext for the Teutonic Knights' crusades against it. While the process of converting the entire populace took time, the official conversion began under Jagiello. Third, the combined strength of Poland and Lithuania was finally able to effectively challenge and defeat the Teutonic Order. The most famous victory came in 1410 at the Battle of Grunwald, also known as Tannenberg, where Polish-Lithuanian forces inflicted a devastating defeat on the Knights, breaking their military power and halting their eastward expansion. Jadwiga did not live to see this great victory, but her marriage laid the essential groundwork for it. Jadwiga herself, despite her youth, played an active role in the early years of the Union. She was known for her diplomacy, her charitable works, and her efforts to promote culture and education. She notably refounded and endowed the University of Krakow, later known as the Jagiellonian University, one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in Central Europe. Sadly, her life was short. In 1399, at the age of about 25, Jadwiga died from complications shortly after giving birth to a daughter who also died. Her death was a cause of immense grief in Poland. Though their personal union as spouses was relatively brief, about 13 years. The dynastic and political union forged by the marriage of Jadwiga and Ladislaw I Jagiello lasted for centuries in various forms, culminating in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This powerful state played a crucial role in the history of Eastern and Central Europe, acting as a bulwark against various external threats and fostering a unique modern society. Ladislaw I Jagiello himself reigned for 48 years after Jadwiga's death, founding the Jagiellonian dynasty which ruled Poland and Lithuania for nearly 2 centuries. Jadwiga is venerated as a saint in the Catholic Church, remembered for her piety, her sacrifice, and her wisdom. Her decision as a young girl to set aside her personal desires for the sake of her nation and faith changed the map of Europe, Christianized its last pagan stronghold, and gave birth to a political union that would shape the destiny of millions for generations. It's a stunning example of how one medieval marriage, born of immense political calculation and personal sacrifice, truly did change the course of history.